Hi there, I'm Rachel Fershleiser from Counterpoint Press, and I am so excited to be here today with Kirk Walsh, the author of The Elephant of Belfast.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
This is a really special work of historical fiction that is an Indie Next pick from America's booksellers, and that a lot of librarians have told me they've really responded to. It's getting great reviews, and we're really, really excited to share it with all of you here today. So just to start, Kirk, could you tell us a little bit about the book and how you had the idea to write it?
So I heard about this idea of the elephant angel, in real life, her name is Denise Austin. And it was on the radio because the Belfast Zoo, it was their 75th anniversary, and they had all these photos of the woman who took care of a young elephant during the Belfast Blitz, but they didn't know who she was. And so they did a campaign, and quickly thereafter, her last living relative called up and identified her. And I think I was among the millions of people who heard this story. And I thought, kind of put it in my back pocket and thought, oh, this would make a great novel. And my dad's side of the family is originally from Ireland and heavily identified as Irish Catholics. And I always knew I wanted to write something set in Ireland, but didn't expect to end up in Belfast. So that was sort of the initial idea. And then I started doing research and found traction in the story as a writer.
Since we're here with a bunch of librarians who are probably interested in this sort of thing, can you tell us more about how you did the research, both into the history and into elephants?
Yeah, so it was kind of bifurcated, both the historical and the elephant research, just because I really needed to learn a lot to write the book. I did write my first draft. I tried to write, so I took a research trip to Belfast in the summer of 2013. And before I took that trip, I did try to get through a first draft just so I could kind of have a relationship to the story in my imagination before I saw all the sights and sounds of the city. And so when I went there, I went to the Northern Ireland War Memorial, and there was a man there named John Hughes who's since passed away. But he basically introduced me to four survivors of the Belfast Blitz and gave me introductions so that I could interview them. And when I was in Belfast, he drove me to one of their houses at Vance Rogers, and I sat in his study as he told me his experience when he was 18 years old, being actually today's the 80th anniversary of the Easter Tuesday bombings, and he was in a office building in downtown Belfast when that happened. And the following morning, he rode his bike, kind of the way my main character, her name's Hetty Quinn, the female zookeeper, rides her bike. But when I interviewed Vance Rogers, that really was the moment where I began to see that I could have some access to the story because I had lived in New York City during the attacks of September 11th. And just the way he described the smells, the shattered glass, the ashes that covered, there's lots of iconic images from September 11th of the tea set covered in ashes and shoes. And also just how office papers would drift up the island. And the same thing happened in Belfast. And so that sort of was where I kind of was like, maybe I can do this. But at the museum, they did have the original newspapers of the days that followed the Blitz, and their main newspaper is called the Belfast Telegraph. And just being, I had to wear plastic gloves, but it was amazing to be able to read those articles. And, the news was a little censored. They didn't want the full scope of the violence. They didn't want to alarm people, but it was quite similar. The Easter Tuesday bombings, about 1,000 civilians died, a little under, and that also was similar to the attacks in New York. And so I also went to the Belfast Zoo, and when I arrived there, I was taken to the office of the executive director of the zoo, and he really, yeah, he's like, on a clear day, you can see Scotland. And I was like, I need to know more than that. Yeah, he didn't have a lot of information about what happened at the zoo during, I mean, as much as I knew from what I read. Um, and thankfully, there's a zookeeper there named Raymond Robinson, who is referred to as the informal historian of the zoo. And he just really, it was invaluable, the conversations we had and walking around the zoo. And then the old zoo exists still below the new zoo. And we went to the elephant house that I write about in the novel, and it's dilapidated and overgrown with weeds. But to be able to stand inside that structure for as a novelist, I took that experience with me back to Texas. Um,
Yeah.
but I
And you
did,
also got to meet some elephants in Texas, is that right?
yeah. So I came home and I did meet some elephants in Belfast, but really the focus was on the place there and the people and the shipyards and getting to know the city. But then I came home and needed to meet some elephants just because Violet, the name of my elephant, appears in a lot of the book. And I was lucky enough to connect with Daryl Hoffman, who's the large mammal curator at the Houston Zoo. And they have one of the few multi-generational Asian elephant families in the country. And I also went there, I went a couple times in 2013 after my Belfast trip. And they had 2 3-year-old elephants, and that's the age of my, in the real story and in my novel, the elephant is 3 years old. And to be able to, and so I arrived there and I thought they were just going to kind of have me be on the sidelines and observe their cleanings and feedings and trainings. And they said to me, "Would you like to wash the elephant?" And I was just like, "Really?" um, so that was extraordinary, just to be able to touch an elephant, to watch an elephant. The second time I went, they were doing an ultrasound of one of the older female elephants because she was pregnant. And it was, I mean, it's a little, was a messy operation to say the least. But there were 4 or 5 zookeepers in plastic smocks and gloves, and they basically had to clean out the rectum of this elephant. And yeah, and but then the
And it
two,
was beautiful, and life is beautiful.
yeah, but the thing is, they were calm. They were amazing. And after I witnessed that, I kind of was like, this is all I need to know. Like being able to see how respectful they were towards the
Yeah.
animal, that they completed the procedure, the animal was never in pain. And I just, in now that the book is out, I've reflected a lot on the research, both in Texas and Belfast. And then I also traveled, being a former New Yorker, I do come back to the city a lot. And, the New York Public Library, particularly the main branch, is an extraordinary resource. And in the map room, I could look at maps from the late 30s of Belfast. The mass observation is on record there. So even though it was mostly diaries of people who experienced the London Blitz, it was firsthand accounts of people who had
Yeah.
experienced the Blitz. So it really, it was an amazing, I learned so much
Yeah.
in the writing.
Thank you. We only have about one more minute. I just wanted to ask you, I've heard from a lot of librarians and readers that they love this book for book groups and discussions. And I was wondering what you most hope people will have discussions about after they read this book.
Well, given what we've been through in the past 13 months, I hope that it offers hope in how we can get through difficult times, and that we can find grace and kind of peace in unexpected places, whether it's a relationship with an animal. I mean, I do know there's been kind of a trend of pandemic puppies, but I think it's, it has been a really difficult year. And my hope is that people will read the book and see the humanity, and that we can become strong when we least expect it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, S. Kirk Walsh. I hope that you will all pick up The Elephant of Belfast. It is such a beautiful book. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rachel.